139 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on the Status of Women.
This guy's garage. Like and subscribe.
We are doing the study Hate-Motivated Violence Targeting the 2S LGBTQI plus community pursuant to Standing Order 108, Section 2, and the motion adopted by the committee on Wednesday, September 25th, 2024. The committee will resume its study of hate-motivated violence targeting the 2S LGBTQI plus community.
One of the things we've seen in sort of our studies on intimate partner violence as well, right, we've heard from witness testimony, is that when there are no consequences, there's nothing stopping, hateful people or bad people or criminals from doing these things again. And so I think you're exactly correct that, I don't even know that all of these things are reported, especially when we look at intimate partner violence or domestic violence, or because there's an element of shame as well for a lot of folks too. So, Mr. Boyce, you said you had looked like you wanted to say something as well.
Yeah, of course. Well, first of all, I really appreciate the question. I do want to bring this committee back in focus, though, to the point that it's not only violent criminals or repeat offenders who are committing these crimes against queer and trans communities, but rather we're living in a heightened moment where folks with no record, everyday Canadians, are being radicalized into an anti-gender movement for a myriad of different reasons. But I really do want to bring it back into focus that it's not only folks that are repeat offenders that are committing these crimes, but rather that there are folks who are being radicalized.
That's fair. And so are those folks getting charged? Are the folks that are doing those radical movements that you're saying, those crimes, are you feeling justice is being served for the people, whether they're repeat violent offenders or they're first-time offenders or they're hate crimes? Do you find that there's justice being served for the victims?
While it's very important to think about justice, I think that there are many ways to think about it. One is the approach that I think I'm hearing in your question, which is a punitive approach towards justice. I think there are other ways to approach justice, and that's why conversations like this, listening to witnesses that are providing real-life testimony, allow us to understand how broader narratives around the pathologization of queer and trans people, some that have been echoed in the House of Commons itself, have consequences. It's not only about the punishments, but about us all acting responsibly with our words to prevent crimes.
If I may, Mr. Boyce,
Chair, to prevent crimes from happening.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm all out of time? Okay, thank you.
I'm kind of all over the place of where to start here. I think it's clear that Conservatives have no interest in asking questions about why we see such a rising hate against the 2S LGBTQI plus community. Tyler Weisner, I thought it was interesting, the questions to you about why you didn't go to police after an online threat. I wouldn't expect the police to be able to do much with an online threat like that. We are moving forward in this country with some online harms legislation. It's not perfect. There's more work to do. The Conservatives have put forward a similar bill that would make you have to sue the online media company in order to get any sort of, to have your post taken down or to get any sort of retribution. So all the onus is on them, but you'd have to sue, say, the social media company in order to get any retribution.
Point of order,
so what
that's not true,
about,
just for the record. If you can table that to prove that, that's all I'm asking. That's not true. No. That's not what the legislation is.
I don't interrupt you with your untruths, Michelle, so you can wait till you have the floor to continue with your untruths.
Right.
So how do you think we fight this? Because you're right, like, it's not just online harms anymore. We're seeing manifestations of this on the street. People are being physically attacked. It's happening in real life now. It's not just online. So, I mean, any suggestions?
You mentioned it's not only happening online. I received a death threat in the streets of Toronto last week while I was walking home from work. How do we address this? I think the onus, or part of the onus, should be on these social media companies, that they need to be monitoring in some way, because these threats are immediate. They need to be addressed in a timely manner, or violence will occur. It's that simple. Now, how to regulate these social media companies is difficult because there are pros and cons. They do provide a great network to reach out to people like yourselves to find community where you otherwise wouldn't. But the threats of violence are real and very vast.
Tyler Boyce, do you have anything to add?
I think that we're really bringing this conversation to where it needs to be when we talk about online harms, and that is, as the other Tyler has mentioned, that these harms are happening in real life. I think one common theme today that I'm seeing is the responsibility of our elected officials to make sure that these conversations are happening in a responsible way that doesn't cause undue harm. I think what I would add is that I know that in a nonpartisan way across all parties, folks do understand the responsibility of what it means to represent Canadians. What I would add is a gentle reminder that all Canadians does not mean those that are politically convenient, but it means all communities, including our communities.
So when you hear from the leader of the opposition, female spaces should be exclusively for females, not biological males, what does that say to you? That was the leader of the Conservative Party.
It says to me that for the trans women who are simply trying to use the washroom, that they are at a heightened risk of becoming a statistic of an unnecessary and avoidable hate crime. It means to me that the ways in which folks are expressing themselves, whether intentionally or not, needs a lot of work done if we're going to live up to the promise of representing all Canadians.
It was said earlier, I believe, by Ms. Baker that 91% of the 2SLGBTQ1+ do not report. So how can we make this a better world if we don't hold these individuals to account? So I'll start with you, Mr. Bryce.
Mr. Boyce?
Boyce, I'm sorry.
That's okay. I really appreciate the question. I think that there are, and maybe I'll be more specific than I was earlier. I do agree that justice must be part of this conversation, but I don't want the sole focus of this conversation to be on punitive approaches to justice. I think that another alternative to justice is taking the path of deterrence. Right now, there's a public education imperative that is necessary in this country. Maybe general Canadians understand what it is to be gay or what it is to be bisexual or a lesbian, but in this committee, I think the focus has been squarely put on gender, and that means trans and non-binary communities. I don't think that we should maybe jump the gun to not giving Canadians the chance to be publicly and properly educated on the realities that trans people face, to bring Canadians into the conversation before we jump to the punitive approach. There are many deterrent ways that we can have that conversation, and just to close, I think that education has to be a first step.
So one of the reasons that I asked this question is in my previous life, a customer of mine who was gay could not speak about it at home due to the culture beliefs, and therefore always was very cautious because of the fear the repercussions even from home. So how do we educate individuals? You talk about education. How do we educate individuals that are coming to Canada that this is acceptable in Canada and we need to embrace it and not make people feel insulted or harm, that they're going to, effectively have harm come to them? How do we do that?
That is such a great way of thinking about it, and I think that we share the approach of empathy and compassion. I'll equally share a story. So I also volunteer at old folks' homes, just to meet new people, have different ideas from a different generation. So many times when I tell folks from that generation about my sexual orientation, the conversation shifts. But in those moments, I have developed so much hope and belief in the good spirit of Canadians to be brought into conversations of broader equality and justice. So many times those conversations could have said to me, this person is a bad person because they don't understand my sexual orientation or gender identity. But when I took the time to listen and give them the patience and grace to come with me along that journey, when they felt safe to ask questions about what it means to be trans or non-binary or gay, suddenly a new connection was built. And I share that example because that individual connection in my life could be the blueprint for how we approach Canadian society in general.
And because my time is limited, I actually volunteer at seniors' homes, and I will tell you, I enjoy it because they're very innocent, and I don't find that they judge people, but I find that they're at the time in their life where they're accepting, and that's really reassuring to me that we are able to understand that as we get older. I'm a senior, I'm not going to lie, and I'm damn proud of it because I'm on the right side of the soil. But what I do want to emphasize is that unless we ensure the safety of everyone, whether it's within their home or outside their home, there has to be penalties so that we can keep everyone safe. And that's what's concerning to me. I have family members that are gay, and I know the struggles they went through with their own families. And we need to change that. And when you talk about education...
Thank you, Ms. Roberts. You're way out of time.
I'm cut off?
Yeah. No, if quickly, 30-second short answer you want to give Ms. Roberts.
End of your question, but I will say that I do think that it's not a either-or conversation, and the point that I'm trying to make is that there is a continuum of justice, and I'm just saying that the first point in that continuum must be one where we meet Canadians with empathy, compassion, and the hope that they can be brought into a conversation. Maybe the last step is a punitive approach, but I'm, at this point in time, in 2024, really willing to lean into that public education as a first piece.
Thank you, Emanuela. You have five
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to start by thanking all of the witnesses who all have been great today. Thank you so much for your testimony. I'm hearing some things that I'm really not okay with, and I've heard throughout this meeting and actually through other meetings within this study that I haven't been okay with, because it kind of just reinforces the idea of using scapegoats when things are not going well. I've heard it said today that, newer immigrants, new populations might be the cause for the rise in hate. And I've heard it at a previous meeting, the same thing, so by another member. And I just want to say that is not okay. And in my experience, people who used to have a mentality of live and let live are actually the ones who have changed their mentality over the last few years. It's not necessarily new people to Canada. It's Canadians who have been here for a long time and who have access to disinformation, misinformation online, and to what they're being shown. And honestly, I think that unfortunately the Conservative Party does use scapegoats, does use certain minority communities, certain communities against each other, and tries to use this as a reason for increased hate. I don't think that's the case, and I think it's very dangerous to go down that path.
Point of order, Madam Chair.
I would like to continue. Thank you very much. So my question here is, what, in your opinion, can be done or said to people who did have this mentality of openness before, live and let live, who have been, kind of influenced by the change in rhetoric that they're hearing online? What are some of the messages you would want people to hear today? Anyone can answer, but yeah, Mr. Boyce.
Sure. I really appreciate the thoughtful question and for pointing out the harmful consequences of scapegoating communities. I think that what can be done in order for us to avoid the low-hanging fruit of scapegoating communities and rather to create the enduring relationships we're going to need to take us into the next decade and definitely into this next electoral season that we're going into are those conversations that are going to be led by 2S LGBTQI+ organizations. The easiest way to bring folks back to an understanding, and I'm actually going to pull from your previous question, is the simple fact that we need to have equal opportunity across all sectors in Canada. Whether it's in housing, whether it's in employment, whether it's in healthcare, if Canadians simply because of their gender identity or sexual orientation or whatever other factor cannot access those same resources, then we're never going to get to where we need to be. I think that immigrant communities understand this maybe better than most Canadians. Most immigrant communities came here for the chance to access all of the amazing resources and become members of parliament, elected officials, leaders in AI and innovation. And we only see that because we were able to access education and resources. When we're talking about scapegoating communities for folks that might have forgotten their humble origins in this country, or folks that are scapegoating whole communities, I think we have to understand the tremendous opportunity we have to create connections in this country. And that doesn't start by scapegoating. It starts by reaching out to these communities in conversations like this, led by people like myself and the hundreds of queer and trans organizations you represent at the Enchanté Network.
I feel so sad about what's happening in schools because I was a teacher and I was actually a sex ed teacher at the beginning of my career. Why is education is important? And do you think that members of parliament should have to go through mandatory training when they are elected to understand our roles, our legal obligations to uphold the charter and which includes the whole Constitution upon being elected? Because it seems that we kind of pick and choose when to uphold it and when not to, depending on the issue.
I really appreciate the question. Of course, I'm a huge proponent of providing folks with the tools that they might need in order to do their jobs in the best way possible. In this case, I think that it's very clear that that also includes training on language to use to ensure that folks are not unintentionally causing harm. I would also add that for the first part of your question on education, my mom was also an educator. And I think that when we talk about education, we have to remember, and I want to bring this into the community, look at the diversity of witnesses who have been called to provide testimony. We didn't all just fall from the sky. We all come from our own individual communities. And so I want to present this committee with the fact that there is a tremendous opportunity for us to share the lessons learned that we've already had to make in our individual communities, religious, racial, ethnic, and otherwise, that have built bridges. That's why when we talk about education, and when I talk about it, I'm such a huge proponent of the fact that people can change their minds, that people can see things in a different way, because I know I've done it, and I know that all of my colleagues who are here today have done it in their own communities. Allow us to bring those lessons learned to those in the House of Commons as well.
Thank you, Mr. Boyce. Next, we have Ms. Roberts. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, first of all, I want to state for the record that I'm really disappointed in the other parties who want to politicize this, and especially to my colleague across the way when I mentioned about a personal client of mine who shared her very deep story with me. It was meant because of her background and her religious beliefs. That's why I brought it to the forefront. That's why I was talking about education, because we need to make sure that in Canada, everyone is acceptable. And that was my point. So I'm very, very disappointed. However, let's talk about online harms. Tyler, I'm so sorry that you had to deal with someone that threatened you. I mean, that's not acceptable. So I was interested to hear from you about the operations. Like Bill C-412 wants to be able to ensure that we don't have this hatred online. And what the Liberals are trying to do is stop it because they want to create another department. We don't need $200 million going towards another department. In my view, I think we need that money going towards what you've stated today about education and helping people understand that it doesn't matter who you love and it doesn't matter who you want to love. That's your personal choice. That's the freedom that Canada offers. And I'm tired of this committee pointing the finger at our Conservative leader who is a believer. We have a deputy leader who is gay and proud of it, and we're proud of her. So I'm not sure where this is going with the Liberals, because when you point fingers, 4 more point back at you. And I want to let you know that I'm sorry for your hatred online. That's not acceptable. I have family members that I love dearly, that I would trust from here to the ends of the world, that are gay, and I'm proud of them. So why can't we make sure that this online hatred, introducing Bill 412 to stop it, to make them accountable, so that individuals that choose to love who they choose to love are allowed to do that without hate? Mr. Weisner, I'd like you to respond.
Yeah, so I was just waiting for the light.
Oh, okay.
Thank you very much, and I do feel your empathy, so thank you. Again, because of my position at the Department of Justice, I will not comment on federal policies, but I'd be more than happy to continue talking about the exclusion, bullying, hate, or violence that my campers have experienced, that they've told me about. That's really the experience that I want to bring, that I want to relay, is that the rise in anti-trans, anti-LGBT, and sexist rhetoric has been devastating queer youth across North America. We have campers from the States, we have campers from the territories. Thank you.
So I would say that the best way to stop this hatred, and I agree with the educational part, absolutely, 100%. We need to make sure that people understand you can choose to love whoever you wish. We're not here to judge that. No one should be. But don't you feel that if we can stop this rhetoric online, this hatred online, that would help with the educational process?
I would say hateful rhetoric online definitely limits the reach of education, I'll say. But again, I'm not an expert in social media regulations, and because of my position at the Department of Justice, I can't.
And Mr. Boyce, do you not agree that we need to stop this hatred online? Like, I get sick when I see it. I really do. I think there should be some consequences to that.
I want to commend all folks who are part of this committee for agreeing to go through with this study and for unanimously accepting it to go forward. I think everybody around the table, everybody in this room can agree that something needs to be done to ensure that online safety is a reality, especially for our trans youth who are right now experiencing a very hard time. I think the debate in terms of whose approach to get there is something that should happen in the House of Commons, but on this committee, I think that we can share, or I can share, that those conversations need to happen in collaboration with queer and trans organizations who are working on the front lines every day. We have the multitude of stories and realities of folks who are experiencing online hate. We have the data and the stories about how that hate is translated into real life instances of unsafety for our community. And I hope that expertise can complement this ongoing discussion about which pathway is going to get us there.
So I hope that we will look at Bill C-412 so that we can make sure that people that do project that hatred online, that we can stop them, because it has to stop.
Thank you, Mr. Roberts.
In your testimony, obviously, North Bay, the issue there, my nephew, my godchild, je ne sais pas, lives in West Nipissing, right beside North Bay, and is feeling some of those threats. And when we look at queer youth, and he's a drag queen, so that adds. Very proud of him. But I wanted to ask you, when we look at, you mentioned about the radicalization, the online. Do you have any recommendations for us when we're looking at the algorithms of social media, the bots? What would you recommend the federal government do? Because these companies like Elon Musk and Twitter, the cesspool of hate, I call it Twitter, how can we what would you recommend us to do as a government in that space?
I appreciate the question. I think that it's really difficult because we have to weigh our civil liberties against what is right and keeping people safe online. I can share that what we've seen in our work is that when it is the wild, wild west online and there are no guardrails for the safety of queer and trans folks, that there are real life consequences to that hate. I brought up in my testimony how folks are being radicalized into extremist anti-gender movements, and a lot of that is happening online. We know that about a third of Gen Z identifies as part of the 2S LGBTQI+ community. We also know that this generation, the future leaders of tomorrow, are spending a lot of their youth online. And so I'd recommend to this government that in doing that balancing act between, of course, our online civil liberties, but also preventing online hate crimes and their real life consequences, we consider the real life experiences of queer and trans folks who are being impacted by the internet, and that there is a role for government to play in that conversation.